Hello everyone and welcome back to some more Nomifactory, where today is finally the episode where we're going to be getting autocrafting. The entirety of last episode was dedicated to this polyethylene line here, so that way we can finally craft blink patterns for autocrafting. Before we do anything else this episode, I'd also like to add 2 more signs to the to-do list, or to-do board, so that way it's not exactly blank here. One of my first goals after getting autocrafting is to get on-demand MV machine autocrafting, so that way we can actually lathe or use an alloy smelter on items. And that's because with autocrafting we can actually do crafting recipes itself like this, but we can't do machine recipes, so something like getting clay dust electrolyzed. And if we have time today, after we get autocrafting, I'd also like to get a mining drill and ender chest, so that way we can just have that running in the background and I don't have to constantly keep mining. Something tells me that's not going to be happening today, but I mean, I can dream, right? So in order to get autocrafting set up, there's going to be 6 different components I want. And while I'd like more of these and definitely higher tier crafting processors, we probably just can't afford it, so it's better to just stick with this for now. The first new thing out of these components I'd like to work on is the crafting processors. And in order to craft those processors, we need a 4K storage component and a crafting unit. Thankfully, the 4K unit's just an upgrade of the 1Ks, which isn't too complicated. We will need tier 2 circuits though, and then in order to create the crafting unit, we're going to need quite a few processors and some aluminium. We've already crafted ME interfaces before, so I won't go over that, but we haven't crafted molecular assemblers. In order to craft those, we need a bunch of aluminium, formation and annihilation cores, quartz glass, and crafters, which is going to be the main difficulty of this recipe. Because if we try to craft one right now, we have every component except for the crafter, and the main issue with this is that we need the actual chassis in the center as well as the resonating crystals. The chassis in the center isn't too bad since it's just grains of infinity and a simple machine chassis, which actually is just iron and more grains. That's actually not too bad. The resonating redstone crystals, however, require restonia and ender shards or a block of redstone, which is going to be the recipe we take since we don't really have an atomic reconstructor yet. And after we got all of these 3 crafted up, those are the main components we need for our auto-crafting system. The rest down here so that we can actually get it functioning. As in, we actually need the pattern so the recipe knows what it wants to craft, and we need the pattern terminal so we can actually encode the patterns or the recipes into those patterns. All in all, this is just going to be a lot of crafting, so I might as well get started on that. It's been a good amount of time, but we were able to get all of these components crafted up for our auto-crafting. You'll notice that I have 2 less molecular assemblers and ME interfaces that I wanted, but I figured I would just go cheap on this so I can at least get it set up for now. Also, a quick side note before we get the auto-crafting set up over there. I had to set up another item conduit here to actually extract the byproducts from the matter and all that from these simulation chambers, because it was pretty much getting clogged up and not being inserted into these drawers. And the reason for that is because this is only inserting on red, which extracts from the loot fabricators, but it doesn't extract from these simulation chambers. Setting up autocrafting is going to take a decent amount of space, so we're going to do it here in this chunk so that way we don't really interfere with any other processes. The main 2 machines used for autocrafting is a 4K crafting cell, or just crafting units in general, and then a molecular assembler. The crafting units are essentially the processing power of your system, and the storage that you can actually use for them is important because every crafting recipe uses a certain amount of bytes in your ME system. If we actually get this hooked up here to the system, we should actually be able to right-click this. And when you have a crafting recipe actually set up, you'll see it here in the crafting status. It'll take up like a certain amount of bytes, like just making this mycelium, for instance, takes up a certain amount of bytes. So for most recipes, you can like get away with having these smaller crafting like units, but for things that are much more gigantic, let's say like a micro miner, if we could actually craft that in our inventory, this is gigantic and needs a lot of crafting bytes. The molecular assembler is basically just a crafting table for your system, and that's really all it does, and these are just upgrade slots so you can actually get it to speed up. So the molecular assembler on its own won't actually do anything, but if you hook it up to an ME interface, which you can actually put your patterns into, and we actually do want the interface terminal to see this, since we want to be able to access this without having to manually right-click on it. The main reason why this is so important is because eventually you'll have like one of these MA interfaces that's completely encased with molecular assemblers and you can't access it from the outside. Either way though, since an ME interface will interact with a block adjacent to it and these will automatically output to a block adjacent to it, you can pretty much just have these right next to each other. All we really have to do at this point is just get it hooked up to the rest of the system, and you don't have to actually use a glass cable here. You can just hook it up with the Applied Energistics conduit. I just prefer to use a glass cable. And you'll notice once it's actually hooked up that you can actually see like a rainbow glow, like indicating that it's activated. So yeah, just like that, we've already got our autocrafting basically set up. All we really need to do is just put in blink or actual encoded patterns into here so that way we can get things crafted up. Of course, with the crafting terminal, you can't actually encode any of your terminals in here, and that's where those two other terminals came in. Primarily the pattern terminal, so we can actually encode recipes. And you'll notice that the pattern terminal looks different here as opposed to my crafting terminal with how it's organized, and that's just because I have everything sorted by, number of items there, that's what it was. So essentially how the pattern terminal works is you've got your crafting recipe on the left, and then on the right you've got your output. So glowstone, for instance, you've got your 4 glowstone dust, and then you can encode 1 glowstone, and that's, well, just your autocrafting recipe. And once you've got your encoded pattern, you simply just come to the ME interface and you just place it into the pattern slot. Alternatively, you could also use your interface terminal, so that way you could access your molecular assembler there without actually having to look at it. So now, if we go over to our crafting terminal here and we look up glowstone, we can craft up 1 glowstone, and you'll see here that the crafting plane here uses 13 bytes of the data from those 4K cells in order to craft 1 glowstone. And so now when we start it, we'll pretty quickly get the glowstone crafted up, and that's just simply because like the molecular assemblers aren't too slow on their own. Let's say, for instance, though, that you don't actually want this glowstone pattern and you want to encode it for something else, or you just don't have many blink patterns ready, you can place it back into the bottom here, and then you can clear it, and then let's say we want to use oak wood for planks, and you just encode the pattern, and now it does oak planks instead of the glowstone pattern. You'll also notice that the pattern terminal has 2 modes, the crafting pattern here on the right, and you can also turn it to a processing pattern, because some machines don't actually use crafting recipes. They could be like an alloy smelter or like a furnace, and you can't really use a crafting recipe on that. So for instance, let's say we want to get cobblestone smelted up into stone. We would put it into our processing pattern here, and so that way we get 1 cobblestone to 1 stone. And then you'd want to hook up your ME interface to your machine, kind of like what we were doing over there for our molecular assemblers, and then have it output back into the interface so that way you get your crafting recipe done. You can also increase the amount of items that are on either side with the shift, like holding shift and using your scroll wheel, so that way you can get more items processed. Basically, if you need a crafting recipe done, use this like crafting pattern. Otherwise, if it's literally anything else, just use a processing pattern because you usually need to be a little bit more like fine-tuned with it. And I think with all of that out of the way, we can finally get rid of the auto-crafting on our to-do list and replace it with something else. I think something in the future I'd like to do is start expanding our blast furnaces there, so that way we have even more resources processing all at once. I think the first thing that I'm going to actually encode for patterns here with the terminal is like get my motors set up so that way I don't have to manually craft them each and every single time. That would definitely be preferable, and that's a processing pattern. Make sure to actually set it back to a crafting pattern when you're trying to change like what recipe it is. And since we have this interface terminal set up here, we don't even have to walk all the way back over. We can just click it right in. And now whenever we want motors, we can simply just demand them here. Which also now means that these work tables here are pretty much meaningless since we already have everything we need now for them. I figured before we get the rest of the work tables actually encoded with these recipes, we should try to actually get ME interfaces and molecular assemblers like encoded first so we can actually, you know, expand a little easier. The main issue with most of these recipes here is that they require some machine as well as a crafting recipe. So we can get most of it done over there in the molecular assemblers, but for something like, let's say, you know, aluminum plates, we can't really craft that in a crafting table. I mean, we can with like a hammer, but that's just a complete waste when we can just use a compressor. So we need to also start setting up recipes with the machines. Which means it's finally time to start doing on-demand MV autocrafting. So we've got a couple options here of what we can do, and the first one is to plug our ME system into this MV line that's already existing here, but the issue is we already use this for our own recipes. Like if I want to manually craft like something in here, I'd rather like this be accessible rather than being used for some auto-crafting recipe. Alternatively, we can make yet another MV line just for the on-demand crafting so that way we don't have to worry about it. Which I honestly think is the route that I'm going to take because eventually we're going to be disassembling that LV line over there and maybe we can start using that for some on-demand crafting as well. Now, while I do plan on actually doing the on-demand MV auto-crafting there, I am kind of getting worried on my resource situation because while we aren't low on like quite a few resources, we are getting low on copper. And you need quite a bit of copper for our recipes here, so I would really rather have a good amount of that going forward. Perhaps instead of the on-demand MV auto-crafting, we take a quick detour over to DML expansion, since we really just need to get more resources. Because while we have a lot of resources right now, we're not going to have a lot as time goes on, and since those resources are going to slowly dwindle, we're going to have to go mining yet again. And considering the fact we can just set up more simulation chambers so I literally don't have to do that, I would so much rather just do that, you know? So in order to expand our DML setup, we could either get more of the same type of model so we can get more resources of the same type, or we can start to branch out a bit more and get more model types. In this instance, we're going to be branching out and getting more model types since we need to actually, you know, get more resources like copper in order to progress. For now, we'll just take one of each model, so we'll need 8 machines, but in the future we'll start to expand it so we have more of each model. So in order to expand our DML, I'm just simply going to build up the machines more over to the left like this, and then I think in the future, once we've actually filled up the rest of the row to like right here, we'll start building like rows or layers above it. And maybe once it gets high enough, we start like moving forward so there's another row of simulation chambers here, or like I split it up so that certain models are grouped up together. We're certainly going to need to work on the organization in the future, but we can just do that, you know, another time. For now though, let's just get all of these placed down and hooked up so that way we can actually get the resources we need. I'd like to point out the reason I was even able to get the thermal elemental data model is simply because I killed a blitz earlier on in the run and I was actually able to like get the dust for it. You know, you would think turning all of this on would absolutely kill my power, but I mean, at first it killed it a decent amount, but at this point, it's kind of slowly starting to like tick down a little bit slower. I get the feeling that we should, yeah, we're able to say, oh, it's slowly starting to go back up. Yeah, we should be able to more than sustain this like power draw, surprisingly, thankfully. The main issue now that I think about it is that this is the power draw, 1933 RF a tick, and it's still ticking up a bit, and we don't even have any of these machines really running all that often. I suppose we found ourselves yet another goal. I think we'll just deal with power and get it actually fixed up properly after we've got MV set up. I would really rather do it later. And yeah, it's gonna kill my power draw for now, so I won't really be able to do much, but I mean like, if we start to have major issues with the power draw from these like simulation chambers over here, I'll start to disconnect some of the more expensive ones like this wither skeleton, which is like 1024 RF a tick, but Hopefully this can sustain itself, and I forgot to actually set up the drawers, so I guess I'll do that now. Another thing I also just realized after having built all of these is that we have every resource I wanted except for iron, I'm pretty sure. So essentially, the creeper models give us coal from the pristine, witches will give us glowstone and redstone from their pristines, we get tin from skeletons, we get copper from spiders, we get gold and aluminum dust from guardians, although we really don't need the aluminium dust. The thermal elementals basically give us all of the different types of like elemental stuff once we actually start needing that. The obsidian dust is also nice, but that's like the main uses like for the elemental stuff later on. And the last two models is this gas model, which is for silver, and the wither skeleton, which is for lead. Basically, this is going to cover all of our basic resource needs for, well, the rest of the game. We'll inevitably have to scale this up once we actually start needing more production later on, but for now, this will work pretty much well enough for us. And it also means I don't have to spend nearly as much time mining each episode. Although do keep in mind that you do get a lot of resources, you don't get every resource you need. Like for instance, like sphalerite or gallium, you don't really get that from the loot fabricators, you actually have to go through different like recipe chains. Well, it's finally time for us to actually get started on this MV line here, and while I don't have the machines, the main idea is to just have like the lines stretch out here and have the like machines on the sides here. We're gonna need a ton of ME interfaces to progress, or at least with the automation side of things, so I really want to just like focus heavy on trying to get all of the resources auto-crafted for these. And in order to craft these things, we're going to need a lathe for the aluminum rods, and we're also going to need a polarizer for the steel, and we'll also need a wire mill since we're going to need all of that copper as well. That copper wire, that is. Alright, I'm going to get the first MV machine and interface crafted up so that way I can show you how this works. Now that we've got our lathe, I can actually show you how to go through a processing recipe instead of a crafting recipe. The first thing we want to do is make sure we place our ME interface on top of the lathe so that way it instantly puts the recipe into the lathe. The next thing we're going to need to do is actually export the lathe downwards so that way when we do like finish a recipe, it can go instantly back into the ME interface, because if we have the export going upwards into the interface, it can't actually import down into the machine. Make sure to set your filters for the conduits, and you can use a shift right click or shift left click it actually is with the Yeta wrench in order to like use a conduit without actually having to see the side. It also works for sides or conduits that aren't connected to anything, so you can, well, click onto that area. Now let's make sure we have this set to black, so now whenever a machine recipe is finished in the lathe, so 1 aluminium ingot to 2 rods, it'll get put right back into the ME interface here. So to set up the ME interface, all we're going to do is just click the interface terminal. We're probably going to need to use the blocking mode at some point soon with some other machine, especially the alloy smelter now that I think about it. But for now, we can just get away with not using it. All we really need to do at this point is just simply hook up the ME interface to the ME conduits and actually make a like processing pattern so that this can work, you know? So coming back to our pattern terminal, let's clear out the crafter recipe and swap it to a processing pattern so that way we can actually set this up. Since we're going to be making 2 aluminium rods from this recipe whenever we use the lathe, we're going to put in 1 aluminium here, and then we're also going to get the aluminium rods. Oh right, I have to search it in the terminal. I have mine linked with JEI here with the search box mode, and that's why it's actually doing that. Now we can put in 2 aluminium rods and encode that recipe. So now 1 aluminium ingot is 2 aluminium rods. The reason why it's important to specify this is because you could put literally anything, like jungle planks here, like 32, and when you encode that recipe, it'll say you need 1 aluminium and 32 planks in the system thrown into that lathe over there. The reason why it selects that lathe is because the ME interface is, well, connected adjacent to it, and so it's going to put it into an adjacent inventory. So essentially now, all we have to do is just throw this pattern into here, and now whenever we request aluminum rods, it should work. Theoretically, at least. Alright, I'm going to take out the aluminium rods that we have. We have a little over a stack there. We just want to make 10. Hopefully this should teleport, or not teleport, it should go straight into here. Yeah, and it's putting straight into here, and then they get thrown right back into the ME interface that they got thrown in from. And now if we go check the system here with the aluminium rods, we have 10 now. Which means, thankfully, it actually works. And just like that, that's the first little bit of automation here. We're going to make sure to keep expanding the machines and exporting to the bottom so that way we can just easily do the conduit system here. By the way, whenever you're doing these recipes, make sure you import into the ME interface that you have the pattern in, otherwise it won't actually count in the system that you completed the recipe. Once this is fully completed and we can actually have on-demand motors and pistons without having to worry about resource costs, is going to be the moment we can finally progress a lot more quickly. Or at least it'll allow us to make more processes more quickly. We probably won't progress at light speed all the way to the end of the pack here, but we'll at least be able to start doing things at, a moderate pace. So in order to craft ME interfaces, we're going to need a wire mill, a compressor, and a polarizer, so that way we can at least make everything in order for the robot arm. Well, most everything here. We won't be able to make the small aluminum gears, which we're going to need either a fluid solidifier or extruder or something like that. But the issue with one of these recipes is that we have to use, a shape in the actual process, which means the machine can only do one shape at a time. So for any extruder recipes that also we need large pipes for with this shape instead, we're basically either going to have to use multiple machines with all of the different shapes put into them and just won't ever change. Or we have it so that the machine will change what type of shape it has on it whenever we're doing a different recipe. But that sounds a lot more complicated than it needs to be. You see, even though it's more resources, more machines with just the shape pattern sounds a lot easier to me, to be honest. So now, just like the lathe, we can add ME interfaces to the other three machines, so that way we can actually use patterns on the rest of them. By the way, you don't actually need to continue the ME conduits all the way to the end of the ME machines here, and that's also why you don't need to connect conduits to all of these as well. They can interconnect and basically act as their own conduit. So this acts as the patterns here and is active, and all the way over here, if we put in some cobblestone, you can see that it pulls it from the system. So it is very functional despite being all the way over here. And as you saw in the montage, I made yet another pattern, so hopefully, and I also need to make sure to disable the terminal things here, we're going to place the item conduits underneath like usual, and then we're going to place the outputs of them on top of the ME interfaces, because I don't think placing them all on the end here is going to work. The only issue I have with having the conduits like this is that we're going to have to put them all on different channels so that way they don't interfere with each other. And I think I want to move this black insert to the top of the whatchamacallit interface here, so that way it just looks all even. Despite the hell that is the aesthetics of this space, I care about the two conduit connections, you know? I think what I'll do for now is just have it on a different color channel for each machine until I inevitably think of something better. So since this is on black, we're going to make sure that this one is on white, and then we're just going to keep on right clicking until we're on different colors. And then this one's on magenta. Make sure that they're all extracting. And now whenever we request a pattern, well, once they're actually inserting up here, we should actually have it all functioning. Thankfully for most of your processing recipes, it really is just this simple. You just do the thing and it works. And the nice thing is you can just connect the ME interfaces to each other like this, and they won't insert into each other, they'll insert into the interface adjacent to them that they actually need to autocraft with. Let's also make sure to cover up the hole here so I don't get myself killed, or at least fall into it and lower my health a shit ton. You'll notice my XP bar is lower earlier. I got killed by a creeper, and unfortunately I wasn't recording when that happened. It was down here in this little area here, and it has a bunch of torches now because, well, there was just so many things spawning down there, and it just kept on, I kept hearing the noises, and it was bothering me. So if you heard that throughout the video, that's why. I think I can confidently say at this point that we've got on-demand MV autocrafting done. We've basically got 4 machines set up. All we really have to do is just make the patterns, prepared. We're just going to leave that blank for now, and when I think of something else, we'll fill that in. And I think for now, the next thing I want to work on is better circuits. Unfortunately, though, I think that's going to be a goal for next episode. Another goal for our next episode should also be to finally get rid of the sugarcane just constantly piling up there, and the reason for that is just because it keeps bugging out and just teleporting to the top instead of getting collected in the minecart. The main important thing about having at least these machines set up though is that now we can get the ME interfaces at least relatively easy. We just need to get another ME interface crafted up so that way we can get more pattern slots, because right now this one's kind of full. I think next episode is going to be the start of automating a lot of different processes so that way it doesn't take nearly as long to get things done. Well, that's it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.